Sergeant Ethan Cole had never planned to be a hero. He was a combat medic, assigned to a small Terran trade group visiting the galactic station called Atheron's Cradle. The station floated in orbit around a dying red star, and hundreds of alien species passed through it every single day. It was loud, colorful, and smelled like 1,000 different worlds mixed together. Ethan's job was simple: guard the crates of agricultural samples while the diplomats talked about grain prices and soil chemistry. It was the most boring assignment of his career. He was 34 years old, built solid from years of military service, with a face that looked like it had been through a few too many bad days. He carried a standard sidearm on his hip and nothing else. Humans were guests here, not warriors. The Terran government had made that very clear before they left Earth. Smile, be polite, and don't cause problems. So when the diplomats disappeared into another 3-hour meeting, Ethan did what any reasonable soldier would do with free time. He wandered off to find food. The market district of Atheron's Cradle was massive. Stalls and shops stretched across 3 entire levels, selling everything from living crystals to fermented drinks that could dissolve metal. Ethan moved through the crowd carefully. He was shorter than most species here. The average alien on this station stood somewhere between 7 and 9 feet tall. He felt like a child walking through a forest of giants. That was when he first saw her. Princess Ilara Val Setin stood in the center of the market with 6 armored guards surrounding her. She was nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and skin that glowed with soft bioluminescent light, shifting between pale blue and violet as she moved. She was young by Sethari standards, barely 100 years old, and this was her first diplomatic tour outside her home system. Everything about her said royalty. The way she held herself, the way the crowd parted around her like water around a stone. Ethan watched for a moment, then shrugged and turned toward a food stall selling something that looked like grilled meat on a stick. He never got to find out what it tasted like. The first explosion hit the east wall of the market. The sound was enormous, a deep, rolling thunder that shook the floor and cracked the ceiling panels above. Ethan was thrown sideways into a stall. His training kicked in before his brain caught up. He rolled, found cover behind a metal counter, and drew his sidearm in one smooth motion. The second explosion hit 30 meters closer. This one was a shaped charge military grade. Someone had planted it inside the wall itself. Debris flew in every direction. Ethan saw bodies hit the ground. He heard screaming in languages he didn't understand. Through the smoke and dust, he saw the princess. 2 of her guards were dead. They lay flat on the ground, their beautiful ceremonial armor cracked open like eggshells. The other 4 were still standing, but they were confused. They moved in tight formation, shields raised, looking for an enemy to challenge. That was the Sethari way: face your opponent, announce yourself, and fight with honor. But there was no honor in a bomb. Ethan saw the attackers before the guards did. 3 figures in black moved through the smoke from the east side, carrying weapons he recognized: compact pulse rifles, the kind used by the Purity Accord. He had read about them in intelligence briefings. They were a xenophobic faction that hated the idea of different species working together. They wanted the galaxy pure, each species in its own corner, never mixing, never cooperating. And they were heading straight for the princess. Ethan didn't think, he just moved. He ran toward the blast zone while every other person in the market ran away. His boots hit broken glass and twisted metal. Smoke burned his lungs. He could hear the pulse rifles firing now, short, sharp bursts that punched through the remaining guards like paper. 1 guard went down, then another. The last 2 tried to shield the princess with their bodies, but a 3rd explosion, a fragmentation device thrown from the side, sent them flying. Ilara was alone. She was on the ground behind a broken pillar, glowing skin flickering with fear, her 4 hands pressed flat against the floor. She was not a warrior. She had never been trained for this. She looked up and saw the attackers closing in, and for the first time in her royal life, she understood that she was about to die. Then a small, strange creature threw itself on top of her. Ethan covered her body with his own. He was less than half her size, and he must have looked ridiculous. A tiny human draped over an alien princess like a blanket thrown over a statue. But he pressed her down, curled himself around her head and chest, and raised his sidearm over his shoulder. The fragmentation device went off 6 meters away. Ethan felt the shrapnel hit his back like a dozen hammers swinging at once. Hot metal tore through his jacket, through his skin, and buried itself in muscle and bone. His vision went white. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to stop, to curl up, to protect himself. He did not move. He gritted his teeth so hard he thought they might crack, and he fired. 1 shot, 2, 3. The first attacker dropped. The second dove behind cover. Ethan kept firing. His arm shook. Blood ran down his back and pooled on the floor beneath him. He could feel the princess trembling under him, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with rapid, terrified light. 4 minutes. That was how long he held that position. 4 minutes of shooting, bleeding, and refusing to die. He fought not like a Sethari warrior with honor and ceremony, but like a human, desperate, stubborn, and absolutely unwilling to quit. When station security finally arrived, they found the attackers dead or retreating and one human sergeant kneeling in a pool of his own blood, still holding his weapon, still positioned between the princess and the direction of the last threat. Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed face first onto the floor. Princess Alara Val Seton pushed herself up slowly. Her gown was soaked in alien blood, his blood, red and warm, so different from her own. She stared down at the small, broken creature at her feet. He had come from nowhere. She did not know his name. He was half her size, from a species her people barely respected, and he had nearly died to protect her without a single moment of hesitation. She knelt beside him and pressed 2 of her hands against his wounds, trying to stop the bleeding, and she whispered a word in Sethari that had no proper translation in any human language. The closest meaning was something like, "The one who stood when no one else would." The medics arrived and took him away. But Alara did not move from that spot for a long time. She stayed kneeling in his blood, staring at the place where he had fallen, trying to understand something that her 400 years of royal education had never prepared her for. How could something so small be so brave? Ethan woke up in a room that was definitely not a human hospital. The ceiling above him curved like the inside of a seashell, glowing with soft golden light that pulsed gently, almost like breathing. The bed beneath him was warm and shaped perfectly to his body, as if it had been grown rather than built. There were no wires attached to him, no beeping machines, no IV drips. Instead, a thin layer of silver liquid covered his torso, slowly moving across his skin like something alive. He sat up carefully. His back ached, but the sharp, screaming pain he remembered was gone. He touched his shoulder where the worst of the shrapnel had hit and felt smooth, freshly healed skin. Whatever technology they had used on him, it was decades ahead of anything on Earth. The door opened, and a tall Sethari female in white robes entered. She had pale green skin, and 2 of her 4 arms held a tray of instruments. She spoke to him in a language he did not understand, then paused, tapped a small device on her collar, and spoke again. "You are awake," the translator said in flat English. "You have been sleeping for 3 days. You are aboard the Sethari flagship Throne of Radiance." Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry, did you say flagship?" "Yes, you were brought here by order of the Queen." "Nobody asked me if I wanted to come." The healer looked at him as if the concept of being asked was unusual. "The Queen does not ask," she said simply, and left. Ethan stood, found his uniform cleaned and folded on a nearby shelf, and dressed himself. His boots were missing. In their place was a pair of soft Sethari shoes that were 3 sizes too large. He put them on anyway and shuffled out into the corridor. The ship was enormous. The hallways were wide enough for 3 Sethari to walk side by side. which meant Ethan felt like he was walking through a cathedral. Every surface was smooth, pale stone decorated with carvings that told stories he could not read. Crew members passed him and stared, some with curiosity, most with confusion, a few with clear disgust. He was the smallest living thing on this ship by a wide margin, and everyone knew it. A guard met him at an intersection and led him, without explanation, to the throne room. Ethan had been in impressive rooms before. He had once stood in the Pentagon. He had visited cathedrals in Europe during leave. But the Sethari throne room made all of those places look like storage closets. The chamber was circular, at least 200 meters across, with a domed ceiling painted with star maps that actually moved, real-time projections of the galaxy spinning slowly overhead. The floor was polished black stone that reflected everything like dark water. And at the far end, on a raised platform carved from a single piece of crystal, sat Queen Salith Val Seton. She was old, not in the way humans got old, fragile and bent. She was old the way mountains were old, solid, patient, unmovable. Her skin was deep indigo, and her bioluminescence was controlled and steady, glowing in slow, deliberate patterns. She had 4 arms like all Sethari, and each one rested on the arms of her throne with the stillness of someone who had not needed to hurry in centuries. She was over 400 years old, and she looked at Ethan the way a hawk looks at something interesting moving in the grass far below. Ethan walked the full length of the throne room alone. Every step echoed. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him from the court members standing along the walls. He stopped at the base of the platform, looked up at the Queen, and gave a respectful nod. "Your Majesty," he said. The Queen studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was low and smooth, carrying easily through the vast chamber without effort. "Sergeant Ethan Cole, you placed your body between my daughter and death. You absorbed wounds meant for royal blood. You held a position alone, bleeding, against enemies who outmatched you in every way. Do you understand what you have done?" "I stopped some people from hurting someone," Ethan said. "That's about the size of it." A murmur rippled through the court. The Queen did not smile, but something shifted behind her eyes. "In Sethari law," she continued, "there is a bond called the Valeth Sarai, the life debt. When a person shields a member of the royal bloodline with their own flesh and sheds their own blood in defense of the throne, an unbreakable obligation is created. Not a debt owed by you, a debt owed to you. Until this debt is honored, you cannot be permitted to leave. To allow someone who bled for the crown to walk back into danger without repayment would bring dishonor upon my house that would last 1,000 generations." Ethan processed this. "So you're saying I can't leave?" "I am saying that your departure would destroy my family's honor." "Ma'am, with respect, I have a posting to get back to." "Then your posting will wait." The words were quiet, but they were final. There was no anger in them, no cruelty, just the absolute certainty of someone who had ruled an empire for centuries and had never once been told no. Ethan looked at her, she looked back, neither blinked. "All right," he said, "where's the mess hall?" Over the next 2 days, Ethan learned the shape of his cage. He was given quarters, a room designed for Sethari, which meant the bed was twice his length, the chairs were too tall, and the shower controls were mounted at a height he needed to jump to reach. He was free to move through most of the ship. He could eat with the crew, visit the observation decks, and use the training facilities. But every corridor that led to the shuttle bays had a guard who politely told him those areas were restricted. The Terran Diplomatic Corps sent messages. They were not happy, but the Sethari Dominion controlled 3 critical jump corridors that connected Earth's colonies to the wider galaxy. Starting a political fight over one sergeant was not something anyone was willing to do. On the 3rd evening, Commander Verk found him. Verk was the head of the Honor Guard, the warriors who had failed to protect the princess. He was massive even by Sethari standards, nearly 9 feet tall, with scarred indigo skin and eyes that burned with cold fury. He stood in the doorway of Ethan's quarters and looked down at him the way a person might look at an insect that had somehow wandered into a palace. "You should not be here," Verk said. "You stumbled into luck. You are not a warrior. You are a small, soft creature from a small, soft world, and the Valeth Sarai was never meant for something like you." Ethan leaned against the wall and looked up at him. "You might be right," he said calmly, "but I'm here anyway." Verk left without another word. Later that night, there was a quiet knock at Ethan's door. He opened it and found Princess Alara standing in the corridor, alone, without guards. She had to bend down to see through his doorway. Her skin glowed soft blue in the dim light, and her expression was something he could not quite read. "I came to thank you," she said, "and to apologize. You saved my life and now my mother has taken yours." "She hasn't taken my life, she's just borrowed my schedule." Alara almost smiled. "You are strange. Every other species I have met would be angry, or afraid, or trying to negotiate. You made a joke about the mess hall." "The food's not bad, actually. That purple soup is growing on me." She studied him with those large, luminous eyes. "Why did you do it? Why did you run toward the explosion?" He was quiet for a moment. "I heard screaming," he said. "That's it. That's the whole reason." She stared at him as if trying to find the lie. She did not find one because there was nothing else to find. He meant exactly what he said. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "Yes." "What happens if I just leave?" Alara was silent for a long time. Her glow dimmed and her four hands tightened at her sides. The silence told him everything he needed to know. Whatever the consequences were, they were bad enough that even a princess could not speak them out loud. Ethan nodded slowly. "Okay then, I guess I'm staying for a while." Alara looked at him with something that might have been gratitude, or guilt, or wonder. She turned and walked away down the corridor, her light fading slowly into the darkness of the ship. Ethan closed the door, sat down on his oversized bed, and stared at the ceiling. "Well," he said to nobody, "this is new." Weeks passed, and Ethan Cole did what humans have always done when thrown into strange places. He adapted. He built a routine. Every morning he woke before the ship's lights shifted from night cycle to day cycle, pulled on his boots, and ran laps through the lower cargo bay. The bay was nearly a kilometer long, and the Sethari crew members who worked the early shift would stop and watch him pass, this small creature running in circles for no reason anyone could understand. Sethari did not run for exercise. Their warriors trained through combat drills and formal sparring. The idea of running without being chased was deeply confusing to them. After his run, he would eat in the crew mess hall. At first, he sat alone. The benches were too high for him, so he sat on a supply crate he dragged to the end of one table. The crew ignored him or stared, but Ethan had a quality that was hard to resist over time. He was genuinely friendly without trying too hard. He learned to say good morning and thank you in Sethari within the first week. By the second week, he could ask for seconds. By the third week, a junior engineer named Kale started sitting across from him and teaching him new words during meals. Kale was young and curious and had never met a human before. He asked Ethan dozens of questions. How did humans survive on such a dangerous planet? Why did their bodies not glow? Was it true that humans could eat capsaicin, a chemical that was literally used as a weapon by most galactic species? Ethan confirmed this by eating an entire bowl of spice stew that made Kale's eyes water from 2 seats away. Word spread quickly. By the end of that week, several crew members had come to watch the human eat poison and smile. In the evenings, Ethan borrowed a datapad from the ship's library and read Sethari military history. He read about their great wars, their codes of honor, their traditions of single combat. He learned that Sethari warriors did not fight in formations the way human soldiers did. Each warrior was an individual champion. Battles were won by the strength of the strongest fighter, not by the coordination of the group. It explained everything about why the honor guard had fallen apart during the bombing. They had been trained to face enemies one at a time, blade to blade. They had no training for chaos. Ethan kept this thought to himself. He was a guest here, not a teacher, and telling a proud warrior culture that their entire combat philosophy had a blind spot was not how you survived on a ship full of people who could crush you with one hand. But Commander Verk forced the issue. It happened in the training yard, a wide, circular arena on the middle deck where the honor guard practiced their combat drills. Verk invited Ethan publicly, in front of 20 guards, to spar. The invitation was polite. The intention was not. Everyone in the room knew what this was. Verk wanted to prove, clearly and permanently, that the human who had triggered the sacred Valeth Sara was nothing special. Ethan accepted. The first round lasted about 8 seconds. Verk moved with a speed that should have been impossible for someone his size. One sweep of his lower arms knocked Ethan's legs out from under him. A strike from his upper right arm hit Ethan in the chest and sent him sliding across the floor. Ethan lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, his ribs aching. He got up. The second round lasted 12 seconds. Ethan tried to use his smaller size to get inside Verk's reach. It almost worked. He ducked under the first swing and landed a solid hit to Verk's knee, but Verk simply reached down, grabbed him by the shoulder, and threw him across the ring. Ethan hit the ground hard, rolled, and tasted blood in his mouth. He got up. The third round lasted 20 seconds. Ethan was learning. He watched Verk's footwork, noticed the slight delay when the commander shifted his weight between his forearms. He dodged 2 strikes, blocked a third using a technique no Sethari had ever seen, a human grappling move designed for fighting larger opponents. For a brief moment, he had Verk's lower right arm locked. Then Verk simply lifted him off the ground with his other 3 arms and dropped him. He got up. The watching guards had gone quiet. Not because Ethan was winning, he clearly was not, but because he kept standing. In Sethari combat tradition, a defeated warrior stayed down. It was the honorable thing to do. To rise after a clear defeat was either madness or something else entirely, something they did not have a word for. The fourth round was different. Ethan came in low, faster than before, and targeted every weak point he had identified. He struck at joints, used Verk's momentum against him, and moved in patterns that were completely unpredictable by Sethari standards. He fought dirty feints, misdirections, attacks from angles that no honorable warrior would use. He lasted a full minute. He even drew blood, a thin scratch across Verk's forearm from an elbow strike that no one saw coming. Verk ended the session. He did not congratulate Ethan. He did not insult him. He simply turned and walked away, and the silence in the training yard said more than words ever could. That night, Ethan found a jar of Sethari medicinal salve sitting outside his door. There was no note. He never found out which guard had left it. As the weeks continued, Princess Alara began visiting him more often. At first it was once or twice a week, brief conversations in the observation deck where they watched the stars slide past. Then it became almost daily. She would find him in the library or the mess hall or sitting on his supply crate writing reports that he could not send to anyone. She was fascinated by him in a way that went beyond curiosity. She had grown up in a world where strength meant size, where power meant dominance, where courage was measured by how many enemies you could defeat in single combat. Ethan broke every one of those rules. He was small and could not overpower anyone on this ship, but he was not weak. The distinction confused her. "Your species confuses me," she told him one evening on the observation deck. Her 4 arms folded as she stared out at a passing nebula. "We confuse ourselves most of the time," Ethan said. "You have no claws, no natural armor. Your senses are average at best. You cannot see in the dark. You cannot hear frequencies above a narrow range. You live for less than a century. By every measure the galaxy uses to judge a species, you should be insignificant. And yet here I am, sitting on your very nice ship, drinking your purple soup." She turned to look at him. How did your species survive? On your planet with all its predators and disasters and wars, how are you still here? Ethan thought about it. We're stubborn, he said. That's probably the honest answer. We just refuse to quit. Our ancestors chased animals across open plains for days, not because we were faster, but because we could keep going after everything else stopped. We survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and our own stupidity, not because we're the strongest or the smartest, because we just keep getting back up. Ilara was quiet for a long time after that. Meanwhile, deep in the secure levels of the ship, Queen Salith was dealing with a different kind of problem. Intelligence reports had confirmed what she feared. The attack on the station had not been random. The Purity Accord had specifically targeted Ilara. Someone had given them the princess's location, her schedule, and the weaknesses in her guard formation. There was a traitor in the Sethari court, someone close to the throne. The queen told no one except her most trusted advisor. She increased security quietly and began watching everyone around her daughter with new eyes. But she also found herself watching Ethan. She watched how he moved through her ship, not with fear, not with arrogance, but with the calm awareness of someone who had been in dangerous places before. She watched how her crew responded to him, slowly shifting from contempt to something softer. And she began to form a plan. One evening, a royal messenger appeared at Ethan's door and told him the queen wished to see him. Not in the throne room this time, but in her private war chamber, a small, heavily shielded room that very few people ever entered. Ethan followed the messenger through corridors he had never seen before, past guards who watched him with sharp eyes. The war chamber was dark and lined with display screens showing troop movements, communication intercepts, and intelligence reports from across the galaxy. Queen Salith stood in the center of the room. She was alone. On the screens behind her, Ethan could see images of the Purity Accord, their known cells, and a highlighted file marked with Sethari symbols he could not read. "The attack on my daughter was not an accident," the queen said without greeting. "It was planned by someone inside my own court. They know her movements. They know our weaknesses, and they will try again." Ethan looked at the screens, then back at the queen. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you saved my daughter once by instinct." She stepped closer, and her ancient eyes held something he had not seen before, not authority, not command, but a mother's fear wrapped in iron control. "Now I am asking you to do it again, by choice." Ethan held her gaze. He thought about saying no. He thought about reminding her that he was a prisoner on her ship and owed her nothing. Instead, he said, "Show me everything you have." The garden world of Valon was the most beautiful planet Ethan had ever seen. Oceans of silver water stretched between continents covered in forests that glowed faintly at night. The air tasted clean in a way that no filtered ship atmosphere could match. The Sethari had chosen this world for their diplomatic summit because beauty was power in their culture, and nothing said power like holding a galactic meeting in paradise. The summit was important. Queen Salith was presenting Princess Ilara to the allied species as a future leader, the next generation of Sethari royalty. Ambassadors from 12 different civilizations would attend. It was supposed to be a celebration of unity and strength. It was also the perfect place for an assassination. Ethan stood in a corner of the security briefing room while Commander Verk laid out the protection plan for the summit. The plan was thorough by Sethari standards, guards at every entrance, checkpoints at all access points, warriors stationed in overlapping zones around the princess. It was built on the same philosophy the Sethari always used: strength, presence, and visible force. Ethan saw the holes immediately. After the briefing, he approached Verk privately. The commander looked down at him with the same cold expression he always wore, but something had changed since the sparring match weeks ago. There was less contempt now. Not respect exactly, but a grudging acceptance that the human was not going to go away. "Your plan covers direct assault," Ethan said, "but it doesn't account for infiltration." If the traitor is feeding information to the Purity Accord, they already know your guard positions. They'll go around them. Our positions are classified. They were classified last time too, and 2 of your guards died in the first 3 seconds. Verk's jaw tightened. For a moment, Ethan thought the commander might hit him, but Verk was a soldier before he was a proud man, and soldiers listened to hard truths even when they hated them. "What do you suggest?" Verk asked quietly. "Let me see the venue layout and the staff manifests. Every person who will be inside that building, cooks, cleaners, technicians, everyone. And give me a comlink tuned to your guard frequency. You want no armor, no weapons." "I don't need Sethari armor. It won't fit me anyway. I need information." Verk provided what he asked for. Ethan spent the next 16 hours studying the venue, a grand crystalline hall built on a cliff above the Silver Ocean. He walked every corridor, checked every door, mapped every service tunnel and maintenance access point. He counted sight lines, measured response times, and identified 17 separate vulnerabilities in the security plan. He brought the first 5 to Verk. The commander dismissed them. He brought the next 5. Verk listened but said nothing. By the 10th vulnerability, Verk was leaning over the table, studying the diagrams Ethan had drawn, and asking questions. "You think like the enemy," Verk said. It was not a compliment, but it was not an insult either. It was an observation from a warrior who was beginning to understand that there was more than one way to fight a war. "That's the job," Ethan said. "If you want to stop someone, you have to know what they're going to do before they do it." The summit began on a warm evening with golden light pouring through the crystal walls of the Great Hall. Hundreds of dignitaries filled the space, tall, elegant Sethari in flowing robes, stocky Krevari diplomats in mechanical suits, slender Velith ambassadors whose wings folded neatly behind their backs. Princess Alara stood beside her mother on the central platform, glowing with soft violet light, looking every part the future queen she was being presented as. Ethan stood in the back, wearing his Terran uniform, watching the crowd. He was invisible here, just another small alien in a room full of giants. That was exactly what he wanted. He had spent the past 2 days studying the staff manifests, and something had bothered him. The guard rotation schedule for the summit had been adjusted 3 times in the past week. Each adjustment was small, a shift moved forward by an hour, a patrol route slightly altered. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they created a gap. A 15-second window where the corridor behind the princess's private quarters would be completely unguarded. Ethan traced the adjustments back through the system. Every single change had been authorized by the same person, Counselor Dreth, a senior Sethari advisor who had served the throne for 60 years. He was old, respected, and above suspicion. He had been at the Queen's side since before Alara was born. Ethan brought this to the Queen directly. She received the information in silence. Her expression did not change, but her bioluminescent glow dimmed to almost nothing, the Sethari equivalent of going pale. Dreth was not just an advisor. He was family in all but blood. "Are you certain?" she asked. "The pattern is clear. Someone created that gap on purpose, and his authorization code is on every change." The Queen closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, the mother was gone. The ruler remained. "What do you need?" she asked. "Keep the ceremony on schedule. Don't change anything. Let Dreth think his plan is working, but move your real guards to cover the gap he created. Turn his blind spot into a trap." For the first time in Sethari history, the honor guard took tactical orders from a human. The closing ceremony was beautiful. Alara gave a speech about cooperation between species, her voice carrying across the great hall with a confidence that made her mother's eyes shine. The audience applauded. The diplomats smiled. Everything looked perfect. Ethan heard the first wrong sound at exactly 9 minutes past the hour. A door opened in the service corridor that should have been locked. He spoke into his comlink, one word: "Now." 3 assassins breached the venue through the gap that Dreth had created. They were professionals, gene-modified, augmented with combat implants, carrying weapons designed to kill quickly and quietly. They moved in perfect formation, fast and silent, expecting an empty corridor. They found 8 HFY warriors waiting for them. The first 2 assassins engaged the guards immediately. The fighting was savage. The assassins were enhanced beyond normal biology, and they fought with a desperation that matched the guards' fury. Energy blades clashed against HFY shields. The corridor shook with the force of the impacts. But the third assassin did not engage. He slipped past the fighting, moved through a secondary access tunnel that even Ethan had not fully covered, and emerged into the hallway outside the Great Hall. He was fast, faster than anything Ethan had ever faced. His body was wrapped in light-bending camouflage that made him shimmer like heat rising from pavement. In his hand, he carried a phase blade, a weapon that could cut through starship armor like cloth. Ethan was the only person between him and the princess. The assassin saw Ethan and did not slow down. Why would he? Ethan was a human, small, unarmored, holding nothing but a combat knife that looked like a toy compared to the phase blade. The assassin expected him to move. Ethan did not move. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. The assassin was faster, stronger, and better armed. His phase blade cut through the air with a hum that made Ethan's teeth vibrate. The first swing missed Ethan's throat by inches. The second opened a deep gash across his left arm. The third cut into his side, and Ethan felt something inside him break, a rib, maybe 2. But Ethan had been watching. He had been watching the way HFY fought, the way these augmented killers moved, the way every species in the galaxy relied on the same assumption, that a smaller, weaker opponent would eventually stop fighting. Humans did not stop fighting. Ethan took every hit and kept coming. He used his knife not to attack but to redirect, catching the phase blade against his own steel, deflecting rather than blocking, staying just close enough that the assassin could not use his superior reach. He targeted the joints, the tendons, the soft places between the armor plating. He fought the way humans had always fought against things bigger than themselves, not with power but with relentless, vicious persistence. The assassin cut his leg. Ethan kept standing. The assassin punctured his lung. Ethan could feel the blood filling his chest, making each breath a wet, burning struggle. He kept fighting. His vision was narrowing. His body was screaming. Every system was failing. But he would not move. In the final seconds, the assassin overextended. A single moment of imbalance that would have been invisible to anyone who was not desperately looking for it. Ethan dropped low, drove his shoulder into the assassin's chest, and used the creature's own momentum to slam him against the wall. The phase blade clattered loose. Ethan caught it with a bloody hand and drove it upward with everything he had left. The assassin fell. Ethan stood over the body, swaying, bleeding from a dozen wounds, his punctured lung making a horrible whistling sound with every breath. He turned toward the great hall doors, raised his knife in his shaking hand, and planted his feet. He stayed there. When Commander Verk came around the corner 30 seconds later, weapons drawn, he found Ethan standing guard over the fallen assassin like a broken statue. Blood pooled at his feet. His face was white. His eyes were barely focused. But he was standing and his blade was raised, and he was still between the threat and the princess. Verk stopped. He stared at the human for a long moment. Then slowly, he pressed his fist to his chest and bowed his head, the HFY warrior's salute, the highest honor one soldier could give another. Ethan tried to nod back. Then his legs gave out, and the world went dark. Alara was there before anyone else. She pushed through the guards, dropped to her knees beside him, and wrapped all 4 arms around his broken body. She held him the way you hold something precious that is slipping away. His blood soaked into her gown, red against violet, and she pressed her forehead to his and whispered his name over and over, as if saying it enough times could keep him alive. For the first time in her life, the princess of the Sethari Dominion begged, not to her gods, not to her mother, not to the stars. She begged the universe to let one small, stubborn, impossibly brave human keep breathing. The medics arrived and pried her away. She stood in the corridor, covered in his blood for the second time, and the same question burned inside her, bigger now, deeper, impossible to ignore. How could something so small carry so much fire? Ethan woke up to flowers. Not human flowers, Sethari crystal blooms that grew in geometric patterns, each one humming with a faint musical tone. They filled every surface of his medical room, the shelves, the floor, the window ledge. Between the flowers were other gifts, a carved blade from one of the junior guards, a bottle of aged Sethari wine from the ship's cook, a datapad loaded with Sethari poetry from the engineer Kale with a note that read, "For when you are bored, you are always bored." Ethan sat up slowly. His chest was tight with new scars, and his left arm felt stiff where the phase blade had cut deep. The Sethari medical technology had saved him again, pulling him back from the edge with silver liquid and glowing machines that hummed like living things. But even their medicine could not erase everything. He would carry these marks. He swung his legs off the bed and looked at the room full of gifts. Something tightened in his throat that had nothing to do with his injuries. A healer entered and told him he had been unconscious for 6 days. In that time, Counselor Dreth had been arrested. The evidence Ethan had uncovered was undeniable, 60 years of loyal service hiding a slow, patient betrayal. Dreth had been feeding information to the Purity Accord for nearly a decade, driven by a belief that the Sethari should stand apart from all other species, pure and untouched. The discovery had shaken the entire Dominion. A trusted pillar of the court had been hollow inside, and no one had seen it except a human who had been on their ship for barely 2 months. The political storm was still raging. 3 allied species had sent formal messages of concern. The Sethari military was conducting a full review of every security protocol, and somewhere in the middle of it all, the Terran government had sent an official request for Ethan's return. The message was polite, diplomatic language wrapped around a simple demand: send our soldier home. The subtext was clear. A human embedded in an alien royal court was a complication. It raised questions about loyalty, about influence, about what it meant for a Terran citizen to hold a position of trust inside a foreign empire. Earth wanted Ethan back where he belonged, in a uniform, following orders, being normal. Ethan read the message on his datapad and set it aside without responding. The days that followed were strange and quiet. He was recovering, so the healers kept him confined to his quarters and the nearby corridors. But the ship felt different now. Crew members who had once walked past him without a glance now stopped to speak. Guards who had looked at him with suspicion nodded as he passed. The junior engineer Kale brought him meals personally, sitting with him and talking about nothing in particular, the way friends do. Even Commander Verk came to see him once. The big warrior stood in the doorway, arms folded, and said nothing for nearly a full minute. Then he spoke. "I told you once that you did not belong here, that the Valeth Sare was not meant for something like you." He paused. "I was wrong." He left before Ethan could respond. On the 7th day after waking, a royal messenger arrived and told Ethan that the Queen had called a full assembly of the court. His presence was required. Ethan dressed in his Terran uniform, cleaned, pressed, and patched where shrapnel and blades had torn through it. He looked at himself in the mirror. He looked tired. He looked older than 34. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had been broken and put back together too many times and was still somehow standing. He walked to the throne room. The doors were already open when he arrived, and the sight beyond them stopped him in his tracks. Every seat was filled. Every guard was present. Every advisor, every officer, every crew member who could leave their station, they were all there. Hundreds of Sethari, standing in silence, their bioluminescent skin glowing in coordinated patterns that rippled through the crowd like waves on a still ocean. It was the most beautiful thing Ethan had ever seen. He walked the length of the throne room for the last time. His boots echoed on the black stone floor, and the silence was so deep he could hear his own heartbeat. At the far end, Queen Salith sat on her crystal throne, and beside her stood Princess Ilara, glowing softly, watching him with eyes that held something she had never allowed herself to show in public. Ethan stopped at the base of the platform and looked up at the Queen. She rose. The entire court held its breath. The Queen of the Sethari Dominion did not stand for anyone. In 400 years, she had risen from her throne for exactly 3 occasions: the birth of her children, the death of her husband, and the signing of the Treaty of 9 Worlds. She stood now for a human sergeant from a small blue planet that most of the galaxy had barely heard of. "Sergeant Ethan Cole," she said, and her voice filled the chamber like low thunder. "When you first came aboard this ship, you were a stranger, a creature from a species my people considered unremarkable. You were small. You were fragile. You carried no great weapons and wore no armor. By every standard the galaxy uses to measure worth, you should have been nothing." She descended 1 step from the platform. "But you shielded my daughter with your body not once but twice. You bled on our floors. You stood in our training yard and refused to fall. You sat at our tables, learned our language, and earned the respect of warriors who have fought for centuries. You uncovered a traitor that 60 years of Sethari intelligence had missed. And when the enemy came for my child again, you placed yourself between her and death with a body that was already broken, and you did not move." She descended another step, and now she was on the same level as Ethan, looking down at him from her full height, but the distance between them had never felt smaller. "We searched our histories for a precedent," the Queen continued. "We found none. No alien has ever bled for the Sethari throne. No alien has ever earned the Valeth Sarai, and no alien has ever frightened me the way your species does." A murmur passed through the court. The Queen let it pass. "Not because of your warships, not because of your armies or your colonies. You frighten me because you produce men like this one, and you call them ordinary." The word hung in the air like smoke. "The Valeth Sarai demands that the debt be honored," the Queen said. "No payment we could offer would equal what you have given. So instead of payment, I offer you a choice. You may stay with full citizenship, a title, and a permanent place in my household. Or you may leave, and the Sethari Dominion will pledge its eternal alliance to Earth. Not as a political arrangement, not as a treaty between governments. As a personal debt that I will honor for the rest of my life, and that my children will honor after me." The court was absolutely still. "The choice is yours, Sergeant. For the first time since you arrived on this ship, the choice is truly yours." Ethan stood in the silence. He could feel every eye in the room on him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders like gravity itself had doubled. He looked at the Queen. He looked at the court, the guards who had taught him to fight, the crew who had shared their meals and their stories, the engineer who had become his friend. He looked at Ilara. She stood perfectly still, her glow steady, her expression carefully controlled. She would not ask him to stay. She would never put that burden on him. But her eyes, her luminous, beautiful eyes, held everything she would not say. Ethan looked back at the Queen. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice was steady. "I'm a soldier. I go where I'm needed." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something warm, something certain, something that had been building for weeks and had finally found its shape. "And right now, I think I'm needed here." The court erupted. Not in cheers, Sethari did not cheer, but in light. Every person in the room blazed with bioluminescence at once, hundreds of bodies glowing in brilliant blues and violets and golds, flooding the throne room with living light. It was their highest expression of joy, and Ethan stood in the center of it, a small dark figure surrounded by a galaxy of stars. Ilara closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. She knelt in front of him, the princess of the Sethari dominion kneeling before a human, and pressed her forehead to his. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't mention it," he whispered back. The queen watched them, and for the first time in decades she smiled. 6 months later, Ethan Cole stood on the bridge of the Throne of Radiance. He wore a new uniform, Terran insignia stitched onto Sethari cloth, the first of its kind. His official title was Sworn Shield of the Sethari Throne. The galactic community was still trying to make sense of it. News agencies across 12 systems had run the story. Diplomats debated what it meant. Military analysts wrote papers about the implications of a human holding a position of trust in an alien empire. But Ethan did not think about any of that. He stood at the observation window, watching the stars, and thought about the simple truth that had carried him this far. He had heard screaming. He had run toward it. Everything else was just what happened after. In the Sethari Royal Archives, a historian recorded the event for future generations. The entry was brief, as all great truths are. It read, "Let it be known that on this day, a human was named Sworn Shield of the Sethari Dominion. He carried no great power. He bore no ancient bloodline. He was, by his own admission, an ordinary man. And yet he stood between our princess and oblivion, not once but twice, and paid for it in blood that was not ours to claim. Let the galaxy note this: humanity did not earn its place among the stars through conquest or through strength. They earned it the way they have always earned everything, by standing in front of the thing that would hurt someone else and refusing to move." Far below in the medical bay, a jar of Sethari salve still sat on a shelf in Ethan's quarters. He had never found out which guard left it for him all those weeks ago. He kept it anyway. Some debts were not about knowing, they were about remembering.